Thank you. Ms. Griffin, can we have a roll call, please?
Adam DeYoung,
Here.
Megan Doyle,
Here.
Andrew Fowler,
Here.
Emily McDonough Souza,
Ms. McDonough Souza is excused. She's away.
Holly Mulrennan,
Here.
Una Petrosky,
Here.
Betsy Ratner,
Here.
Cindy Wolf Boynton,
Here.
and Susan Glennon.
Here.
8 board members present.
Thank you, Ms. Griffin. Okay, agenda item 3, appointment of new board member. So as was previously announced, Ms. Hennessy recently resigned her seat on the Milford Board of Education due to illness. The Democratic Party of the 4th District has nominated Catherine Alling to fill the remainder of the term. Ms. Alling was born and raised in Milford and attended Milford Public Schools. After graduating from Jonathan Law High School, she went on to attend UConn, where she earned a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering, then returned to make Milford her home with her husband. Ms. Allen is a manufacturing engineering manager for a green hydrogen company working to be a part of the green energy transition. Catherine states, "I believe it is our responsibility as a community to prepare our children to be informed and thoughtful citizens so that the next generation is prepared to take on any challenges set before them. I believe that we meet this responsibility by investing in schools, supporting teachers, and supporting policies that allow students to learn creativity, critical thinking, and compassion for those different from themselves." And that's a direct quote. Ms. Petrosky, do you have a motion?
I do. I make a motion that the Milford Board of Education appoints Mrs. Alling to the unexpired term of the vacant 4th District seat.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Fowler has seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Congratulations, Catherine. Our city clerk, Ms. Karen Fortunati, is here tonight to swear Catherine in so she can take her seat at the board table tonight.
Good evening. Can you raise your right hand? Is this loud enough? Yes. Do you solemnly swear that you will faithfully execute and discharge your duties and responsibilities according to law as a member of the Board of Education of the City of Milford to the best of your ability, so help you God? I do. Congratulations. Thank you.
So welcome, Catherine. We'll move on now with the rest of our agenda. I turn the meeting over to Superintendent Kutaya.
Thank you, Ms. Glennon. Thank you, members of the Board of Education. We have before you the third reading of Policy 5144.2, Use of Exclusionary Timeout Settings. Thank you, board members, for providing us with feedback. As we went back, we considered all the items you suggested, and I'm going to turn things over to Mr. Brown so he can go over what we hope is a much more clear version of this policy. But again, we are happy to take more input.
Good evening. Pardon me. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for letting me go through this policy with you this evening. We have made some changes based on the feedback from the prior readings, and the main focus or the goal was to clarify the use of timeout and how it can be implemented differently for students with special education needs compared to students who do not have special education needs. What we have done is we have on page 1 the introduction, which is followed by definitions. So we moved the definitions further up into the document. And then we have the next section focusing on how timeout can be implemented for students who receive special education services. That flows through the next 1.5 pages with no noteworthy changes from the last time we met, except for changing the use of the word timeout setting or space and making that consistent throughout. And then we have that followed by a section for students not receiving special education services. And that runs completely through to the final section on page 5, which is a description of what's in place for all students. that we hope will reduce or eliminate the confusion where we were going back and forth between sections.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I did note just one housekeeping item on page 1. The second paragraph, the first blue sentence, timeout, is used to help a student regulate his, of her, or his behavior. So if you could clean that up, Ms. Griffin. I think it should be his or her behavior. Board members, any comments on this revision? Ms. Wolf-Boynton?
I would just like to say thank you so much to Mr. Brown and all of those who were involved. I know it was a kind of torturous process, but I think it was well worth the time put into clarification.
Thank you. Ms. Petrosky?
I also think this is a fabulous version of this policy now. It's very clear, so thank you. And I did have one additional housekeeping item on page 2. On the second paragraph, under students receiving special services, it's just with is duplicated. First sentence, at a minimum.
Where's that again?
The sentence that begins, at a minimum, for those students with.
Oh, right. Any other questions or comments about the policy as it stands? Ms. Mulrenin?
I'm just looking for my marking. There was another housekeeping, and it was a, just like a colon, semicolon. I thought I highlighted it, but.
If it's minimal like that, you could
I'll just
send
email,
it to,
yeah.
you could email it
Yeah.
to us afterwards.
Yeah, because I don't see where I have
If
it.
it's just a punctuation mark.
Yeah. And I wanted to thank you also. I know it was a lot of labor. It's always hard to write and rewrite when you've written policies and think that you've written it. And I also just wanted to confirm that there are some sentences that are duplicated, and I think they're intentional. I just want to make sure that that's the case. So for example, the very first paragraph on page 1 that says the manner in which timeout intervention is implemented is then also in the second paragraph.
I don't think we need both, Mr. Brown, right?
Correct. Yeah, well, we'll look and decide which one to eliminate.
Okay, and then there was one other that was duplicated like that as well. On page 4, under students not receiving special education services, the first paragraph, last sentence, there may be rare occasions where it is necessary. And then the second paragraph has the same sentence. It's the second to the last. So again, I didn't know if that was intentional or it was just duplicated.
Yeah, we can remove, I think as we were moving the paragraphs around, we
Yeah, exactly.
cut and paste, or copied and pasted and left one in.
Right, that's what I thought, but I wasn't again sure because I didn't write the policy, but I know, again,
Thank
during
you.
revisions that can happen, so.
Thank you, Ms. Mulrenin. Any other comments or questions? Ms. Ratner?
Thank you, Ms. Glennon. This might be a Guinness Book of World Record, how many times I had to go back and forth with this. And so I'm totally appreciative, as my colleagues here, that you were willing to hit the Guinness Book of World Records. And it's amazing that there were those few housekeeping. When you had so many sections, that could easily have happened. Thank you.
Okay, so this policy will come back on, at our business meeting for adoption with the others. All set.
Thank you. We'd like to now move to 4 policies for a first read. The first one, 4118.11, non-discrimination as it applies to personnel, has an update due to change in statutes. And I'm going to turn things over to Ms. Kapazna.
Thank you. As Dr. Kutaya mentioned, everything other than the 2 housekeeping items and the replacing board with district are due to statutory updates. And those legal references are noted in red on the bottom of page 2 of 3 and 3 of 3. And other than that, the paragraph on the first page is defining race as is defined by the accompanying statutes. I think that's it.
So the rest of the policy is unchanged, correct?
Correct.
And still complies with all the legal requirements, obviously.
Yeah, yep. And you'll notice that the part about on employment applications, there's certain things we can't ask anymore that we used to be able to, so that's, again, because of a statutory change. So,
Any questions from board members? Mr. DeYoung?
Thank you. I think the change in legislation that you're referring to is the ADA, is that right? Or the ADA Amendments Act?
no, it's also some of the other acts on the second page, the general statutes, I think it's the Connecticut general statutes.
So this is more to be in line with Connecticut than it is the
Yeah,
federal government?
exactly.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Other questions from board members? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring this policy back at the next meeting additionally for adoption.
Thank you.
We'll be moving to 5131.91 and 5131.911. Both will be covered by Dr. Fedigan. Hazing and bullying have significant updates due to changes in legislation, so I'm going to have her walk you through these, okay?
Thank you. Good evening, members of the board. Thank you, Dr. Kutaya. So we thought it was fitting to place both of these policies that Dr. Kutaya referenced together, as hazing is referenced often when we're discussing the bullying policy. So the hazing policy will take first. The policy does have a definition for hazing right at the beginning. There is a piece in here that requires us to talk about making sure that our advisors of clubs, activities, and sports have an annual notification of what this definition and policy is, and that we're supporting an introduction to this policy and the requirements to those, again, who are supervising students engaging in these activities. On the second page is specifically where I'm speaking to how coaches, athletic directors, administrators, and advisors will be alert to possible situations and circumstances of events which might include hazing, and they should all be reported immediately to the principal or superintendent. The policy also does talk about if any students or employees are violating this policy, they'd be subject to disciplinary action. And so there are policies just below for your reference, and this policy is obviously more brief than the bullying policy. We can take any questions regarding this policy at this time.
Questions from board members on the hazing policy? Ms. Doyle?
Hi, thank you. Just a question. I don't see any of this covering any internet activity in terms of hazing in that sense. Does this include it? Has any of the lawyers discussed that and how far it extends? I mean, one of the things I appreciate is that these policies, some of them, this is 21 years old. A lot has changed in the last 20 years, so I think that's one area that hazing is probably occurring.
So I think because specifically
what you're speaking to as far as like online harassment, that's definitely referenced very explicitly in the related policies that are cross-referenced below. So I think it's really covered through that crosswalk of those policies, specifically suspension and expulsion due process, and the policy, again, 5114, would address that. As well, the bullying policy.
In the first sentence, it does say hazing activities of any type, so I would think that might cover internet as well.
I'm just, the only question I have on that is that I would assume that if it's any activity, if related to the organization, club sports and activity, would need to be like a prerequisite before being covered by hazing in terms of internet activity, whether students are on Instagram in their own personal time, is it related to the activity of which is it a sports team? That's the biggest question I have, would be going, how far does it extend?
Well, and again, I think because that type of harassing or bullying type behavior, inclusive of hazing, would be included in the other related policies, so I think it is sufficiently covered. I guess I could connect again with legal counsel and ask about adding and inserting a phrase there to include social media interaction or online or through technology or other means. We could probably include a phrase like that in that beginning sentence if you'd like.
We may not be able to include it just because of legal reasons, but I would appreciate it if you would speak to anyone else about lawyers about that. Thank you.
I'll follow up on that piece.
Ms. Mulrenin?
This is where my other housekeeping duty was discovered. Under hazing on page 1 of 2 of the policy, 5th paragraph, that starts with endangered, the mental health in quotes shall be included but is not limited to, and there's a colon there.
Okay. Thank you. You have that one, Mrs. Griffin? Okay, thank you.
Mr. DeYoung?
Thank you. 2 quick questions, Dr. Fettigan. I hope they're quick. One is there a reporting structure in place? Is that in administrative regs, or is that, it doesn't appear to be spelled out in the policy as best I can tell?
There is a reporting structure that would be in the administrative regs for this particular policy. That is not fully developed yet, but for the bullying policy is, and it would be the same.
Okay.
So, of course, students or parents or staff members who have that concern would speak to the building administrator, and also our instructional supervisors of student development and wellness, Mr. Smith, and also Dr. Gillespie, are supporting building administrators in that work.
So when that is complete in the admin regs, once this policy is approved and that's complete, is that generally made available to parents and students? I know there's a student handbook that goes home. Is that something that would be included in that, or how would parents or students be notified?
Our regulations are available on the website.
Okay.
On our district website, and they're also referred to in the student handbook.
Okay, great. The other question I have for you is, and I know that you took these 2 together, the hazing and the bullying. It's somewhat unclear to me what the main difference is between the 2. It seems like hazing would be considered bullying. Maybe bullying might not be considered hazing, but hazing certainly would be considered bullying. So I just wonder if you could sort of shed some light on the difference between the 2.
Sure, I'll give that an attempt. So I think really with hazing, it's in that right after the definition, the line about as a condition for continued membership, I think is where hazing is more related to a student's membership to a group or extracurricular, whether it is in athletics or an extracurricular otherwise, that it's about that membership piece, whereas bullying is more of a global harassing behavior.
So you could, I think that's clarifying, you could potentially have a situation where a student was being bullied inside a group, but it wouldn't necessarily be considered hazing because they're not suggesting that you're going to get kicked out of the group if you're not doing this.
Right. So that's my understanding. It's really a condition for continued membership or related to a specific activity or organization.
Okay, understood. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Other questions? Ms. Wolf-Boynton?
Dr. Fettigan, on page 2 of 13 of the bullying.
Not that policy yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Apologies.
Just doing the hazing. I had two questions. So on the second page, the very second, just in the second line, I think there's a housekeeping item. It says circumstances of events. Should that be circumstances or events?
It should.
Okay, and on the last sentence there in that same paragraph, well, so the sentence before, it says, if hazing or planned hazing is discovered, involved students will be informed by the discovering school employee of the prohibition contained in this policy and will be required to end all hazing activities immediately. All hazing incidents will be reported immediately to the principal and superintendent. I wonder if that should be clarified to be all hazing or planned hazing, to be a little bit more specific. Because I'm assuming that if somebody's caught planning a hazing event, that really falls under the same category as having gone through with it.
I would agree, and I think that language should be parallel.
Okay. And I was wondering, on the first page, this is more of just a clarification for me, the I guess the fourth paragraph that begins, endanger the mental health shall include, but is not limited to, an activity except those activities authorized by law. It just seemed a little odd to me that, because the way I'm reading that is that there could be activities authorized by law that might endanger the mental health of someone. Am I misreading that? So I'm wondering what kinds of activities those might be.
Well, we certainly would not have any of those, so let me go back and take a look and see if I can get some clarification.
All right, thank you. That would be helpful to me. Do we have other questions from board members on this policy? Good. Okay, I see none. We can move on to the bullying.
My computer just froze.
Uh-oh.
So let me just plug this in. I think it's a battery issue. I have a printed copy of it too. Do you have it pulled up? Oh, I was looking for my notes here. Thank you. Well,
Minute, Ms. Fettigan, to fix your computer?
Yes, I have my notes here, but Wendy has the printed copy
Okay.
for me too. Thank you. So this is a much more lengthy policy, of course, with several definitions. So the policy does open again with the definition for bullying, but also I think the most significant difference between this and the previous existing policy is it's called out very early on the teen dating violence piece. So that is a part actually of the legislation that's new from our previous adoption of this policy. Again, the bullying policy is referring to physical or emotional harm to an individual. At number 2 on page 2, it talks about an individual being in reasonable fear, so that's the emotional harm piece, and infringing upon the rights or opportunities of an individual at school. This policy does speak to, as the question before from Ms. Doyle, about the bullying or harassing behavior being either written, oral, or through electronic communication, or a physical act or gesture. Again, the teen dating violence is repeated under definitions, and there was some discussion about moving teen dating violence into the other definitions, but we made a decision to keep that definition up front in the policy because it's one of the more significant features of this revision in statute. There's a full definition also of cyberbullying, a definition of mobile electronic device. This policy also refers to what we're required to do, and as spelled out in administrative regulation, with tending to positive school climates in each of our schools. There's definition for what's inclusive of a school employee, and that's really significant to thinking about the reporting structures that Mr. DeYoung was speaking to before. The policy on page 4 outlines examples of bullying, which are obviously inclusive of some, but not all limiting. The bottom section on page 4 talks about the comprehensive program or safe school climate plan. And so we, by statute, have those committees meet several times a year with the safe school climate specialists. The safe schools climate specialists are typically our assistant principals, our deans of students, or at the elementary level, our teacher leaders. And so, again, that would be even more explicitly outlined in the administrative regulation. Annually, the board authorizes the superintendent or a designee to submit a safe school climate plan through our coordinator. So our instructional supervisors of student development and wellness, Mr. Smith and Dr. Gillespie, help to support the development of the safe school climate plan at the district level and then supervise that being done at each of the school levels. It's important to note that there's an identified reporting timeline when our students, families, or staff experience bullying in our schools. And of course, we work to really make sure that those forms are easily accessible on our website, and our students and families and staff are able, obviously, to submit anonymous reports when they witness or experience acts of bullying. The policy, again, just outlines the different procedures for different stakeholders to ensure that students and staff are protected with bullying. And what we do is we also notify, obviously, anytime an individual is involved in a bullying case, both the aggressor or alleged victim are notified, again, according to a reporting structure. And I would say there obviously is annual training for bullying prevention and intervention. Obviously, one of our most significant strategies as a school system to promote a safe school climate is to think about those proactive, preventative strategies. So not just what happens when bullying is noted, but what can we do to really establish safe school climates. There are strategies for us to consider that are school-based and also district-based. And so those are outlined in the sections that refer to prevention and intervention strategies and the district safe school climate coordinator responsibilities. We again have a district safe school climate coordinator that represents pre-K-5 and Mr. Smith and Dr. Gillespie at the secondary level. We have safe school climate committees again at school building and district level. And then the policy, of course, refers to regulations, which we have in greater detail. And I'm happy to take any questions on this policy.
So just some housekeeping items on, on page 2, the word definitions is deleted. So I'm wondering if that should be put back in so that we're identifying where the definitions are, and perhaps take out on page 2, almost at the bottom where it says other definitions for the purposes of this policy, and just have all the definitions together. And on page 5, the numbering is off. It starts with number 2.
Okay, I think Mrs. Glennon, this is a case of what Mrs. Mulrennan was referring to before, because there was some cutting of sections. I think what we wanted to do with the board's approval is to have the teen dating violence piece called out in the beginning of the policy. So we would take out, the recommendation would be to take out the first definitions where it appears, and where it appears saying other definitions, cross off the word other and have definitions there.
Okay.
How does that sound?
Sure.
Okay.
Ms. Griffin is saying that when the policy's all cleaned up, the numbering will automatically correct itself.
Great.
I was a little confused by, when we went over to page like 6 and 7, there's the paragraph symbol, and the numbering itself is crossed out. So on page 6, it stops at number 13, and then after that, all of the numbers are crossed out and there's a paragraph symbol. So I'm wondering what the intent is there. Was the numbering supposed to continue, or was there a reason that the numbering was eliminated?
The
Google
numbering,
Docs.
the numbering should continue.
Okay.
I think it's just because of how
So that will
it's
correct
revised.
itself
It will
also
correct
then.
itself,
Okay.
right.
No worries.
I think it's just that suggestion mode.
Right. And the one thing, one question I had was, I'm wondering if, since the teen dating violence is such a, it's being really called out in the policy, if that should be added to the subject, to the title at the top, so that it's clear where, if that's an issue, where parents might find the information on teen dating violence.
So are you suggesting in the subject maybe bullying prevention and intervention / teen dating violence?
Yes.
Okay.
And of course, if for some reason, if you want to check with legal counsel on that, you certainly can do that.
Yeah, I will definitely check with legal counsel. I think it makes sense to do it. It's, to your point, it's what we would widely know in the field of education, that's a huge shift in the statute and policy, but one of our stakeholders may not be aware. So I'll see if that's permissible or recommended from legal counsel.
Okay. And is under, I also had a question. The third paragraph, that's the first red paragraph on page 1, which references, it says that teen dating violence may take many different forms and may also be considered bullying and or sexual harassment. So do we have a sexual harassment policy? We do, correct?
So we do, and we recently rescinded a policy, but it's in lieu of, now replaced by the longer, more comprehensive
Right.
Title IX regulations.
So is teen dating violence referenced in that policy at all? Or is it only here in the bullying policy?
I don't know that exact phrase is. It's certainly implied. I'd want to go back to just
Okay.
triple check on that.
Thank you. Board member questions? Ms. Mulbrennan?
I know you said the numbering's going to be self-corrected, but I just want you to be mindful that you make reference to item 9 and 10 above. So when that numbering gets straightened out, just to be mindful that you'll need to also make that line up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and just Mrs. Glennon, to add on to your question, I think because the Title IX legislation and policy after the final rule explicitly refers to sexual harassment, it's sufficiently covered, but that is one that I'll also follow up on with legal counsel.
Ms. Petrosky?
I just had a couple of things to add. If you go to page 4, which has the examples of bullying are include but are not limited to, would it make sense to move that under the definition of bullying? Because there's a paragraph that also says bullying shall include but need not be limited to, and maybe sort of a combination of those. So on page 2,
Yeah.
the first paragraph after the numbering and this list are somewhat duplicative.
Yeah, I'm wondering if after the definition and then the bulleted on page 2, 1, 2, and 3 points, and then the bullying shall include but be not limited to, we
Yeah.
can maybe list those bulleted items below and check for redundancy.
And then maybe the examples could go beneath that,
Right.
just to keep it together.
I think that does make sense.
Okay, and then I had, excuse me, I've been flipping my pages all over the place here. So I have what I would consider a duplicative on page 4 and 5, the last definition, the last paragraph of 4 and the first paragraph of 5 seem very, very close.
Can you tell me what the paragraph starts with?
So on page 4, The paragraph underneath comprehensive program safe school climate plan starts with consistent with the requirements under state law. The board authorizes the superintendent or designees along with the safe school climate coordinator to be responsible for blah, 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 blah. And the paragraph following that on page 5, the first one in red, says the board authorizes the superintendent or designees along with the state safe school climate coordinator to be responsible for blah, 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 blah. And then it says at the end, as required by state law. So they're very similar. I'm wondering if we need both.
We don't need both, so we'll
Okay.
decide which one to keep.
Okay. And that, this is a little tricky, so sorry. On page 6, where number 15 is crossed out. So some of the wording here got a little crazy for me. The direct development of case-by-case interventions for addressing verified bullying and teen dating violence, addressing repeated incidents of bullying and teen dating violence against a single individual or recurrently perpetrated bullying and teen dating violence perpetrated by. It just, there's a lot of perpetrated in there.
Okay.
Could we do something like a single individual or recurrent bullying and teen dating violence perpetrated?
Yeah, it's redundant. We can fix that with a revision.
Sorry, I know it's a little nitpicky. And the last one is just a housekeeping on page 8. The last paragraph, the number 1, implementation of a positive behavioral interventions and support process. I think S has to come off the interventions.
I'm sorry, I just could not hear that.
Sorry. On page 8, implementation of a positive behavioral interventions and support process. I think the S needs to come off the end of interventions.
Yes.
Okay. And I think to your point, Ms. Mulrennan, on page 8, the 9 and 10, when it does get recalculated, I think are actually correct. So I think we're good with that. That was it. Thank you.
Dr. Fettigan, I would just add to Ms. Petrosky's first comment on the 2 redundant paragraphs on page 4 and 5. I think there might be some information in the first paragraph that is different, so I would just make sure that you've got everything that you need when you make some revisions.
Okay.
Any other questions from board? Ms. Doyle?
Thank you. I have 2 questions. On page 8, in the 3rd paragraph, not later than 30 calendar days after approval by the Department of Education. I'm not sure who that Department of Education is, if it's the state or the federal, or if it's the Milford Department of Education.
The State Department of Education.
Okay. And then the last question I have is on page 1. This is just a technicality, I think, because I can see through the policy that they talk about electronic devices and media communications and things like that. But the way I read this last paragraph, or through an electronic device or an electronic mobile device owned, leased, or used by the board, so it exclusively includes only devices owned or leased or used by the board, and I don't know if that's intentional or not intentional. First paragraph. On page 1.
Page 1.
Page 1, first paragraph, last section of the semicolon. Because it gives examples of areas where you can't use bullying, and so just the way it reads, I think you can only get in trouble if you use an electronic device owned or leased by the school board, even if you are bullying in a different capacity using your personal device.
Right, so that wouldn't be the case. So I'll work with legal counsel just to clarify. I think we probably want to have something that refers to those devices that are owned or leased by the board, and, you know, especially with regard to our AUP, but that's not limiting to
Right.
students using their own devices. So we'll rephrase that.
Great, thank you.
I'm wondering there as well, why, so this is a student policy, so why does it say electronic devices owned, leased, or used by the board? It doesn't, policy doesn't refer to, it's not a board policy.
I think it's just they're referring to the devices that are owned or leased or maybe used in the context of the child's education, maybe on
Maybe
because
authorized by the
maybe
board? Is it
authorized
more-
by, it's probably just not the right word instead of used, right? Authorized may be better, but we still need to think about phraseology for students using their own devices.
Right.
So we'll give that another look.
Did you have anything else, Ms. Doyle?
I was just going to add on to Ms. Glennon's comment. It could be provided by the board or the district in that sense, because then it would be encompassing those that are on school property as well as those that go home with them.
Or issued by.
Yes. The problem with the issue is we wouldn't cover devices that say are in the learning commons or something like that that aren't going to leave from here. That would be my
Right.
only caveat.
So maybe provided.
The word district might actually be a better word than the board in this instance.
Okay.
Ms. Wolf-Boynton?
Thank you. So my comments are related to page 1 and the top of page 2. So my assumption is that some of the numbers under what bullying is causes physical harm, places an individual reasonable fear, creates a hostile environment, infringes on the rights of students, that perhaps you made those cuts because some of those things are listed up in the second paragraph. I would like to me, those definitions of what bullying does, that idea of a hostile environment infringes on the rights, I really like that they were broken out. And truly, it doesn't matter to me whether they stay up in that second paragraph or all go back in under the definition of bullying. But I would love to see them together. So adding, causes harm, emotional, so having those, however many there were, those 5 of them, 6 of them, now with the new addition, infringes on the rights or opportunities of an individual at school. I would love to see them all together, and if they do stay up in that second paragraph, perhaps we could break them out with bullet points, just so that they are right there and very clear. Because I think that for people who are dealing with situations of what is bullying, which could be very individualized and open to interpretation, being able to very clearly see what it means is important.
Okay.
So Dr. Fedigan, on page 2, those lines 3, 4, 5 are intentionally struck.
They were intentionally struck, yes.
So we're going to have to check because bullying, there are some policies that are highly regulated and some that make recommendations through statute. I think the definition of bullying has to come straight out of statute. So I just want to not make this promise that we can reinstate 3, 4, 5.
We'll need to, obviously
Right.
we'll need to look and check with legal counsel, but I've taken a note to see, I understand what the recommendation is, and so we'll see if it's something that can be done.
Okay, thank you. And it is that same wording up in paragraph 2. So
are
if
you
we,
talking about paragraph 2 on page 2?
No, on page 1. The board also prohibits any form of bullying behavior outside of the school setting if such bullying, 1, creates, 2, infringes,
Got it.
3, substantially disrupts. It just seems like that should all be together.
With the definition.
Well,
So take paragraph 2 on number 1, page 1,
Yes.
And make that part of the definition?
Well, I don't think it necessarily has to be part of the definition, but paragraph 2 says this is what bullying does, right? Bullying creates a hostile environment.
Yep.
Bullying infringes on the rights. Bullying substantially disrupts.
Yep.
It also, if you go down a little farther, it also causes physical and emotional harm. It also places an individual in reasonable fear. It also infringes on the rights or opportunities.
Right.
Right? So it seems to me that it's spread out. And again, I get it with the statutes. There are some things that we have to say, but if we're defining what the result of bullying might be, again, I know it can be individualized depending on what is happening in each circumstance. I just want to make sure that we're being really clear what bullying might be. It's not just a black eye, right? It's also environment. It's your right to a free and proper education without fear, et cetera, et cetera.
I understand what the recommendation is, and I can see how they're separated in the policy, so we'll follow up with legal counsel to see if we can find a way to condense maybe those two pieces.
This recommendation reminds me a little bit of the timeout, right? So you try to balance, let's have an introduction to a policy and then launch into definitions. And so I think when we take a look at a structure or template for policy, we typically have this intro kind of feel and a statement of position. This is what the board will and won't do or tolerate, et cetera. And then we launch into definitions and then more specific. So without sacrificing introductions, I think we'll revisit this recommendation, Ms. Wolf-Boynton, and see what parts of an introduction we can hold on to, and then marry what we can within a definition, if that's okay. Sure. Right?
Other comments or questions from board members? Ms. Doyle?
Just adding to Ms. Wolf-Boynton's comment, the only thing I would add is in the 1, 2, 3. I'm assuming you don't have to hit all 3 elements. It's just or between each sentence. And so at the end of them, because the last one finishes, what would be the new 3, I think? Physical or emotional harm, semicolon R, or. I just can't tell if it's and, must have and, 1 and 2 and 3, or 1 or 2 or 3. Does that make sense?
Are you talking about on page 2?
1 to 2.
1 to 2. Yeah, it's not and, it can be or.
I mean to turn off my thing. If you just add or between each sentence, I think that would be clarifying.
Instead of just at the last.
Yes.
Mr. DeYoung?
Thank you. A couple points. To piggyback on what Ms. Doyle said about cyberbullying, I think my personal opinion is it needs to be spelled out a little bit further. Cyberbullying, as you know, is significantly different in nature to just regular old, hallway bullying or classroom bullying. It can happen so fast in the blink of an eye. It can involve hundreds of people as opposed to just single or multiple people. My mind goes to, okay, if a text message is sent out that is considered bullying and then forwarded to an entire class of students, is everyone that receives that text message liable to be held responsible under this bullying policy? It's not, just to my eyes, it's not clear whether they would be or not in this policy. So I would be in favor of fleshing that out a little bit further. I know some of this language is statutory.
It is, and there is obviously, I think, a pretty clear definition of cyberbullying here, but as far as like an investigation or issuing a disciplinary consequence, when you're saying, would anybody be held liable, that's something that I think we would really instead be spelling out in administrative regulation and not so much in the policy. Because those cases, as you indicated, are so individualized, right?
Sure. Is it currently spelled out in administrative regulations?
Yeah, there are, but again, those cases when we have a student that engages in a poor choice using technology, there are so many individual nuances that we couldn't possibly, in any policy or administrative regulation, cover every instance.
No, of course
not.
not.
It's sufficiently spelled out as far as student responsibility.
So you don't feel like it needs to be also included in the policy? To me, if I was to go look for it as a parent, I would go look for the policy first. That would be the first thing. I would see cyberbullying and not have any additional reference for it. So, I don't think there's a ton of harm in having it in both places, personally.
I think policy really needs to be much more broad. So if you think about a hierarchy, policy should be more broad in general. There are some policies that are very specific because of statute. And then the purpose of regulation is to try to boil down to levels of specificity. So Mr. DeYoung, what you're asking is if a child receives a text message or that's been passed along to them, are they now the bully, right? So now you're getting to a very specific level. What happens if this board passes a very specific policy, then we're coming back to you asking for now more specifics and more specifics. So I would not be in support of defining with greater detail cyberbullying to the extent of saying, but if you're a recipient of, because like Dr. Fedigan is saying, it's impossible now under this definition to lay out all the layers of what cyberbullying is and is not. That you're going to have to trust administration through the implementation of this policy, through regulation, to flesh that out.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Kutaya. I think it's globally addressed here, and that's sufficient. Administrative regulation would be another layer of detail, and then also parent handbook, parent and student handbook.
Because I'm thinking of a situation, actually, that if a child does receive a text message that includes pornographic information or images, that is now not just bullying and harassment, but breaking the law. So, again, there's another nuance. So how do we flesh that out? That's through our practice and regulation.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying, and we've had this conversation before about the difference between policy and admin regs. I think you can generally speak to the advancement of technology without calling out. I only use the example of a text message just to make the point, but I think there is, and I can write some, I'm not great with coming up with legal language off the top of my head, but I think there's some language that we could put in there that would generally spell out, for instance, if you're not the originator of the content, if you're not the...
But that's not true, though. If the content includes pornography, you are in trouble. You are breaking the law and the policy. So just that very general language doesn't apply to all the situations, and by far we've seen some of those in the last 4 years I've been here. So even that kind of language would not necessarily apply.
Okay. I guess I'll have to trust you on that, which is fine, I will.
And, however, it may be appropriate for us to refer to the AUP policy within this policy as just a reference.
That's something more specific.
I think that would be great.
That might be a solution to kind of, crosswalk the two policies.
I think that would be great.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do that.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
One other thing that's not related to cyberbullying, on the school climate school safety climate plan, I assume those are significantly different at the various levels of, elementary, middle, and high school. Is that something that you would bring in front of the board, maybe as a general discussion about what those look like and what those entail? Just so that we have a general idea of what exactly a plan like that looks like.
That's something that Dr. Kutai and I could discuss further, but I think the more helpful share out that we've done, for example, occurred recently in the board instructional highlight that had to do with creating a sense of belonging in our schools. And throughout that presentation, that instructional highlight shared a number of proactive strategies that would be inclusive of a school climate plan.
Okay.
And one of the things that we're very proud of is the involvement of our students in that work.
And that also crosswalks with the presentation that Mr. Nielsen makes. So
right.
Those are hand in glove.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of when I was
Yeah.
reading this policy. I'm sure there's plenty of overlap in what he talks about and what these these school climate groups talk about at schools.
And he's very much involved across the district in the development of those plans. And when it comes to matters of safety, they're not part of public record, and they're not FOIable. So doing a deep dive presentation with the board probably wouldn't be to our children's safety or student safety. But I think between those two presentations, the board does get a flavor of what those feel like.
Okay, fair enough. And one last question, I won't belabor it too long, but I assume because of statute, we're required to, well, the policy states that we're required to report out the number of incidences to the State Department of Education?
Yes.
And is that something that we include on our website, or is that publicly available anywhere?
No, those details are not publicly available on our district website.
Not the details, but I mean the number of incidents that we have?
We don't post those.
Okay. Is there a reason that we don't post them?
I think if we did, we have few enough circumstances of verified bullying cases by school that I would worry that there'd be individually identifiable and verifiable information that we would not want to share.
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you.
Other questions from board members? None? Okay, then we'll bring
So that
this.
is a meaty policy, so if you are rereading, because I know you guys like to do that, and you have additional questions, please feel free to send them along, Ms. Glennon, okay?
Yes.
It's a really important policy for us to get right, for the protection of all, so please do take your time looking through it again and providing us feedback. Our last policy of the evening is 6115, Ceremonies and Observances. This is a required policy that we do not have, so that's why it's in all red. I'm going to walk you through that this evening. This policy covers ceremonies and observances as they take place in our school buildings with and for our children. So the policy starts off with a statement of separation of church and state, that while there is separation of church and state, the second paragraph suggests that the district will approach religion, though, from an objective, curriculum-related perspective, secular in nature and devoid of advocacy, encouraging all students and staff members to be aware of the diversity of beliefs and respectful of each other's religious and or non-religious views. So that is the primary stance of this policy. It's really summarized in that second paragraph. The policy goes on to provide allowances for absences for religious observation on the calendar that we may not have as a school day off. That is done so through writing, where parents are notifying schools that students are potentially absent for a religious observance, and those are excused absences. This policy does allow the recognition of religious holidays through an objective study of religious holidays. So you will see those bulleted numbers 1 through 7 that provide parameters for how these observances can occur in our schools. The policy also covers the requirement for silent meditation, or we may know it better as a moment of silence, usually coupled with a Pledge of Allegiance in our schools. It's just a good time to do the pledge and have a moment of silence. And finally, in this policy, the requirement to have time each day to recite the Pledge of Allegiance at least once a day. Participation is voluntary. Students may choose to participate, may not participate for any reason, including religion, political, philosophical, or personal reasons. And if they choose not to, they need to do so in a non-disruptive manner. That is the essence of the policy. Any questions?
Questions from board members?
I did just want to clarify. So the practice now is that there would be both a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance, that they're kind of coupled together?
That's typical, yes.
I see no questions or comments from board members.
That wraps things up.
Very good. Do we have any members of the audience who'd like to make public comment this evening? Okay, seeing none, I will dispense with the public comment statement, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I second.
Mr. Fowler has seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, and we will adjourn at 8 p.m. Thank you, board members.